Welcome to the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast, where we explore the latest in enterprise trends, tech, and strategy with the top leaders shaping the future.
Hi, welcome to a podcast on stage with enterprise thought leaders. My name is Kanika and I'm the managing editor of Enterprise Talk, which is our enterprise technology platform. We have engaging conversations with global thought leaders and industry experts, which reach over 1.3 million people worldwide. Given the data is the most valuable resource for any business, it's crucial companies should generate the right insights from them. However, this is becoming extremely difficult since data is accumulating at mass volumes. It's becoming almost impossible to quickly analyze data and obtain the information needed for smooth business processes and strategies. Today, we speak with Markus Müller. He's a Field CTO, APIM at Boomi, about the hacks that enterprises can use to improve their data quality. Before we do that, welcome to the conversation, Markus. Great to have you here with us today.
Thanks for having me.
A little bit about Markus first. He's as I said, the global field CTO for API management at Boomi. Where he drives the strategic vision and execution of API management solutions worldwide. In this role, he works with enterprises to craft strategies that bridge hybrid IT environments and accelerate application modernization as part of the broader digital transformation initiatives. Before joining Boomi, Markus co-founded and served as a chief technology officer at APIIDA, which is leading the company's technology strategy and product development. A frequent speaker at international tech conferences and API meetups, Markus shares practical insights on API governance, integration strategy, and emerging enterprise architecture trends that are shaping digital transformation. I'm hoping we'll have this kind of insights coming from you today as well in our conversation, Markus.
Absolutely.
Is there something I forgot to add? Would you like to say something more about Boomi or about yourself before we start with the conversation here?
Yeah, maybe for those of us who don't know Boomi, we're an 11 times leader in the iPaaS Magic Quadrant, and recently also have been named the leader in API management. But of course, we're also looking at data management. We're having AI management in our portfolio. So that kind of like puts us in a unique position where we're able to help our customers end to end from data all the way to where it's used and how it's used.
So great. Now, so my first question to you is, what would you put as a top hack for better data quality? I know it's a very overarching, generic kind of a question, so feel free to give us very specific inputs wherever you think they are the best, required.
Well, I think the best hack probably is the most obvious one. First, make sure you understand what data quality actually is, right? Because you need to have some definition of data quality within your organization. Like, what is it for you, for your organization? How does it look like? Because if you don't know that, then you don't know how to measure it. So any actions you will take, you don't know if they have been successful or not. So that's probably, the most obvious one. And I think what's also worth or saves you a lot of headaches is put the check or the validation of data to the ingestion, right? So if you don't have broken data in your systems, you don't need to fix later. And probably also something that, at least when I talk to customers, is a big topic is they come to us or they talk to us for a reason. So they have some agentic thing coming up, or they want to know how to better leverage their data. And then they are usually at a place where they ask themselves, now, do we need to have a big one-time cleanup of the data we already have to make it usable? And probably the best hack there is don't go for that. Now we're cleaning it and then we're leaving it alone for a few years and then we clean it again, but do it in a continuous way. So make that process of monitoring data, cleaning data, making sure it's still usable and valid, make that a habit and make it a continuous experience instead of that just these one-time things.
So is it just one trick you're going to share with us, or are there more?
Yeah, I mean, that's the main one, right? Because for a lot of customers, they still need to kind of identify how to make their data usable, right? A lot of customers already thought about how can I store my data? They have big data warehouses, data lakes, whatever your architecture looks like. But surprisingly, a lot of them don't actually think about how to make use of the data, right? So maybe another important hack would be to think from the opposite side and like, what are my use cases? What do I actually want to do with my data? right? Because it doesn't make sense to prepare for a future of everything, right? You may want to have a certain direction. So these are the use cases that we want our data to be able to drive. And that is what we optimize instead of just doing everything a little bit.
So for the leadership level, for the CIO or the CTO, for instance, what would be your most critical guideline for data management? And what role does data management platforms or MDM play in this process?
So first of all, treat data as an asset, right? So not just something you collect for the sake of collecting it, but really as an asset. It sets you apart from all of your competition that may not have that data, right? Again, we're talking about using data because just having it is not good enough, right? So make sure you treat it as an asset. Good quality data in a way that is usable. So we're talking about data liquidity here, have data available when you need it, where you need it, in the format you need it. That is something that can create a competitive advantage against all of your competing companies that may not be able to do that. And of course, with that data liquidity especially comes the job of integration. Again, it's not enough to have the data, but make sure you use that data, you create common data models, you enforce these models. I think that's for the C-level always the most interesting thing. It's not like creating all these rules and creating all these processes and then do nothing with it. But it's better to have less rules, but enforced rules than a whole bunch of rules, but nobody enforces them. And then you run into these situations where years later you have to do a big cleanup because the rules may have been there, but they weren't enforced. So I think that these are like the most prominent guidelines for CIOs, because the thing is that bad data and bad quality data leads to bad decisions. And bad decisions lead to a lot of wasted resources. And that is something that, given the speed that we now operate in economy, is just something that you cannot afford.
So what would you say is the role of data validation at the input points of data, or wherever else in the life cycle of data usage?
So I think the biggest job of MDM is probably to kind of create that. I'm not saying a single source of truth, because data is usually highly distributed, but having that one place that defines your models, defines the rules, defines what governance you want to do, makes sure you catch those duplicates. Like, that's what MDM is for, right? So it's really helping you to bring it all together. Everything that we just talked about, the little hacks, the guidelines, it's all happening in MDM. That's your place where you go to, where you have to enforce all of these rules, and where you can also define them and have that unified view on your whole data landscape. I think that's the most important thing. You have that one place you can go to, and from there you can then take it further.
So just for my information, does it also work about data hygiene or structuring of data, or is it just validation and then the rest of it is taken over by other tools?
I mean, it depends a little bit on the MDM solution that you use. I'd say it is important to have that hygiene, right? If you use the tools that usually an MDM brings with it for that, or if you incorporate some additional tools that are maybe based on certain AI models, or models that were learned and taught using the actual data, that is something that mostly depends on the data you have and the capabilities of the MDM you have. Like, as I said, in Boomi, we're strong believers in that platform approach, right? Being able to go all the way. So for us, of course, that is a part of it. But actually, definitions differ here quite a bit, right? So we're saying, like, master data management, yeah, it's about the design time, but not about the runtime. While hygiene is more about the runtime, making sure all that big data, that terabytes, petabytes of data, are actually, like, according our rules. That is something that happens at runtime, not at design time. So it's not part of MDM. It really depends on who you ask.
Then how do CIOs ensure their data is clean and structured in standard formats? I think you already answered a little part of this in the last question, but is there anything specific you'd like to recommend for CIOs to make sure that they adhere to best practices for clean data or data hygiene or structure?
Yeah. And as I shared in the hacks, right? So it's much easier to clean data when it enters your system, right? And at that point, you can already enforce like the first few common formats, if you will, like making sure all your timestamps are in the same time zone, right? So use UTC for everything and not like having to worry after the fact, like, oh, this database uses this time zone and this database uses this time zone. And now we have to convert everything or otherwise all of our reports will be wrong. Like that is something where you can put or you can create a lot of value actually, right? Making sure you do all of these checks in Ingress, make some transformation if you need to, because it then makes it easier after the fact. But another thing that helps is to continuously monitor your data and profile your data, because what I see with a lot of customers is that they see data models as something very static. Like you define it once and then you use it for 10 plus years, which is not how economy is working right now, right? So we have such a fast paced environment where you need to be able to do changes on the spot. And if your data model holds you back, you have an issue with innovation. So again, make sure that you have continuous monitoring, continuous profiling, learn as you go, like where can we where can we make our models better? Where are maybe fields that we can deprecate, right? Especially when we're thinking about AI now, every data field counts towards the tokens that the AI has to crunch. And that means it can cost you a lot of money to send data no one needs to the AI.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask you about that as well. How are AI tools helping and ensuring that the data that is used for organizations is better than it would be in the in the raw form, if I can say that.
So I think there is one thing that I would like to point out there, like Gen AI that mostly everyone means when they're saying AI nowadays is not a silver bullet for things you do during runtime, right? So making sure or observing data streams and checking if they're actually like sent according to the formats I defined. That is something that Gen AI is really not very well suited for, because A, it's relatively slow, and B, it's relatively expensive. So for that kind of scenario, you can use Gen AI to then build static filters or static checkers that then parse the data flowing through. That saves you a lot of money, a lot of headaches, and it's just so much faster. Where Gen AI really shines is identifying things that might go together, even though maybe they're not using the same naming, right? So just building out these profiles in the beginning. And what will probably be a game changer is when we see different AI agents working together. So to give you an example here, yeah, you mentioned that I spend a lot of my time in API management. So what we usually have to do in API management, somebody creates an API and now you have to check, is it according to my data models, right? Are the entities what I have defined that I want them to be? Now, the cool thing is with Gen AI, I can basically just hand over the API definition to an agent that looks at these models. Again, the naming doesn't need to be perfect. It can say, okay, this looks like it should be this model, but it isn't. These are the 5 things that need to be changed. And it can hand that back maybe to another AI agent creating the API. So you have like multiple agents working together back and forth, and they make sure that all the data models are correctly represented in the APIs. And I think that is a game changer, because it eliminates that back and forth that you usually have between the API engineers and the data engineers, right? Because that is, nobody wants to do that, right? So it's just probably human nature that you don't want to hand over your design every single time for every single change and get it rejected again and again. So we can let the agents do that, because those don't get frustrated by that.
So you mentioned that Gen AI may not be the best tool to be recommended. So what else would you recommend for better data profiling and monitoring in a platform or otherwise?
Yeah, I think we're more in the realm of, if you will, traditional machine learning AI, right? So, as I said, data is hugely different depending on how you collect it, what your purpose is, what your business is. So, we can use these rules and rules-based systems to train AI models that then do this, but not in a generative way, right? Not using any of the large language models as an underlying base, but really just good old plain machine learning to tell the systems like, this is good data, this is bad data, and then raise the alarms.
So this is the end of my questions. Is there something I've missed? Because we're not experts at this particular topic, as you know. Is there something else you'd like to talk about pertaining to what Boomi does or what you do for data management?
Yeah, I think again it is like that idea of going end to end that I would put an emphasis on. Because one thing that is often not overlooked, but maybe taking a backseat when we talk about data and data management is actually, again, the usage and the scoped usage of data. But what do I mean by that? What we have right now, that system where people design an architecture, usually the depth of these architectures is relatively shallow. So you have like 2, 3, 4 levels maybe, because then humans start to like forget how things are working. So we try to keep things relatively shallow. So at any point in time, you kind of have a good idea of where that data is used, how that data is used, in what scopes they are used. When we think about agents working with other agents, like they can decide to build much deeper call graphs, right? So it's not limited to 3, 4, 5 levels. They can go as deep as they want. And that means we as humans lose track on how that data is consumed, who has access to that data, why they have access. So we kind of need to double down on that, usage scenario, and just making sure that no matter what happens on the consuming side of the data, our data stays safe, right? So I think that it is something that is sometimes lost or overlooked in these discussions about data quality, but it is part of the equation. So I would stress that. But other than that, I think we have covered almost everything that there is.
Thanks so much for that input as well, Marcus. So this would be the end of our conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for joining us for the Enterprise Thought Leadership Podcast. Please do follow us on social media and subscribe for more ideas and insights. Until next time.